Welcome to the Health and Safety Committees and Representatives webinar. If you have questions about occupational health and safety, OH&S, call the Alberta OH&S Contact Centre at 1-866-415-8690. If you are in Edmonton or the surrounding area, call 780-415-8690. If you have questions about this webinar, email lbr.ohnsfeedback@gov.ab.ca. After watching this webinar, please take a moment to fill out a short survey and give us your feedback. The link to the survey is on the YouTube page below the subscribe button. Before we begin, we have a disclaimer and copyright notice that we need to bring to your attention. We've done our best to ensure that the information in this webinar is accurate and up to date. However, if there is any discrepancies between this webinar and the OH&S legislation, the legislation is correct. We'll give you a few moments to read the copyright notice. The main requirements for Joint Health and Safety Committees, or HSCs, and Health and Safety Representatives, or HS Representatives, are in Section 13 and 14 of the Occupational Health and Safety Act. Additional technical requirements related to Health and Safety Committees and Representatives are in Part 13 of the OH&S Code. You can download the legislation from either the OH&S website or Alberta Queen's Printer website. You can also order print copies of the legislation from the Queen's Printer. In this webinar, we review the requirements for Health and Safety Committees and Representatives. This webinar complements the Health and Safety Committees and Representatives Bulletin. You can find the bulletin on the OH&S resource portal at ohns-pubstore.labour.alberta.ca. Once you are in the portal, you can bring up the bulletin by typing HSC in the search box at the top of the page. In this presentation, we'll give you an overview of Health and Safety Committees and Representatives' roles and duties, when you are legally required to have a Health and Safety Committee or representative. We'll talk about the requirements for forming a committee, including selecting the committee members and designating an HS representative. We'll cover the Health and Safety Committees and Representatives meeting and training requirements and entitlements to pay. Finally, we'll cover employer responsibilities related to Health and Safety Committees and Representatives. So let's launch into the first section, roles and responsibilities of Health and Safety Committees and Representatives. Health and Safety Committees and Representatives bring workers and employers together to discuss and address health and safety concerns. They allow workers to participate in occupational health and safety, and they support the three basic rights of workers: the right to know about worker site hazards and controls, to participate meaningfully in health and safety, and to refuse dangerous work. What does a Health and Safety Committee or representative do? They serve an advisory role for management in regard to workplace health and safety. Health and Safety Committees and representatives do not assume managerial responsibilities. Worksite parties who have control of work sites, such as employers and prime contractors, are responsible for implementing solutions to ensure health and safety at the workplace. The core duties of a Health and Safety Committee or representative are set out in Part 2 of the OH&S Act. These are the receipts, considerations, and dispositions of worker health and safety concerns, participating in the employer's hazard assessment process, making recommendations about worker health and safety to the employer, and reviewing the employer's worksite inspection records. In addition, Alberta OH&S officers may ask Health and Safety Committee members or Health and Safety representatives to accompany them on inspections. Now we turn to the question of when a health and safety committee or representative is needed. The OH&S Act sets out requirements for health and safety committees and representatives. Employers with 1 to 4 regularly employed workers are not legally required to have a health and safety representative or health and safety committee. Employers with 5 to 19 regularly employed workers are legally required to have a health and safety representative. Employers with 20 or more regularly employed workers are legally required to have a health and safety committee. Please note, OH&S can also require that a health and safety committee or representative be established at any worksite. Don't include volunteers in your count of regularly employed workers for the purpose of determining if a health and safety committee or representative is required. However, volunteers are still workers with all the same rights and protections under the OH&S legislation, and they are allowed to participate in a health and safety committee or as a health and safety representative of the worksite. Worksites with 2 or more employers may require a health and safety committee or representative. If there is no prime contractor and 20 or more regularly employed workers at the site, the employers must work together to establish a health and safety committee. If there is no prime contractor and there are 5 to 19 regularly employed workers at the site, the employers must designate a worksite health and safety representative. Workers from any of the employers on site can be selected for these roles. If a multi-employer worksite has a prime contractor, a health and safety committee or representative is not required. However, on these sites, the prime contractor must designate a person to ensure employer and worker cooperation and address matters that a health and safety committee would otherwise be responsible for. Workers at the worksite with a prime contractor can still access their employer's health and safety committee or representative. You'll find more details about a prime contractor's health and safety roles and responsibilities on the OH&S resource portal. Let's now move on to the rules for establishing a health and safety committee. The OH&S Act sets out the basic rules for health and safety committee structure. Committees must have worker and employer members. Worker members represent the workers and employer members represent their employer. Worker members must work for the employer. They cannot be managers or supervisors. Unionized workers must be represented if the employer has 1 or more unions at the workplace. There can't be more employer members than worker members on a health and safety committee. The OH&S Code sets out additional rules for establishing a health and safety committee. Employers must decide how many worker members the committee needs to address relevant health and safety concerns. The number of worker members must fairly represent both unionized and non-unionized workers. Once the employer decides how many worker members are needed, the employer sets a reasonable time frame for their selection. Applicable unions select health and safety committee members to represent unionized workers. Non-unionized workers select their own committee members. If the union or non-union workers don't select their representatives within the set time frame, the employer must select those worker members. And of course, the employer selects the committee's employer members. Another part of establishing a health and safety committee is selecting 2 required co-chairs. Worker members select the worker co-chair, and employer members select the employer co-chair. The Health and Safety Committee is required to establish terms of reference. To start with, the terms of reference must include the term of office for committee members and how often the committee meets and how it keeps records. The terms of reference must also include processes for selecting co-chairs and worker members, carrying out meetings, forwarding health and safety concerns to the employer, replacing a member during their term of office, resolving disputes if the committee members can't agree on a recommendation to the employer, and addressing circumstances where committee members are not carrying out their duties. These are the minimum requirements health and safety committees can include other processes or requirements to support the effective operation of the committee. Now let's look at the requirements for designating a health and safety representative. The responsibilities for designating a required health and safety representative lies with the employer. Representatives must work for the employer, and they cannot be managers or supervisors. Now we'll discuss some of the specific operational requirements for health and safety committees and representatives. We start with meetings. Health and safety committee meetings must meet quorum, the minimum number required to make decisions to carry out valid business. To achieve quorum, both worker and employer members must be at the meeting. As well, at least half of the total number of the committee members must be present, and at least half of those present must be worker members. OHS laws also have rules about special meetings. A health and safety representative can call special meetings with their employer to deal with health and safety concerns at the worksite. A health and safety committee must hold a special meeting if asked to do so by an OHS officer. Committees can also call special meetings if they are following a process specific to their terms of reference. Where health and safety committees and representatives are required, they must have training that meets legal requirements. Employers must train health and safety committee members or health and safety representatives. The training must include the roles and responsibilities of co-chairs, committee members, and representatives, worksite party obligations, and workers' right under the OHS Act. Employers can develop and provide the training themselves or use an outside training provider. Please note, the OHS Act and Part 13 of the OHS Code apply to certain farm and ranch operations. But where applicable, farm and ranch employers of waged, non-family workers only have to train health and safety committee co-chairs or health and safety representatives, not all committee members. Health and safety committee members and representatives are entitled to pay while doing health and safety representative work. Workers who are health and safety committee members and representatives are considered to be at work when they are performing their duties, functions, or attending training related to their committee or representative positions. The OHS Act states that health and safety committees must hold their meetings and carry out their duties and functions during normal working hours. Health and safety representatives must also carry out their duties and function during normal working hours. Employers have duties related to health and safety committees and representatives. All regulated worksite parties have general duties under the OHS Act. Some of an employer's general duties relate to health and safety committees and representatives. They are, the employer must ensure as far as reasonably practicable that health and safety concern raised by workers, supervisors, and the committee or representatives are resolved in a timely manner. Employers must ensure that committees and representatives comply with the legislation requirements of their position. Employers must make health and safety information related to worksite hazards, controls, work practices, and procedures readily available for workers, committees, representatives, or prime contractors. Employers must make sure that workers and the committees or representatives have ready access to the OHS legislation. In addition to the general duties, employers have specific requirements they must follow. We've covered some of these already, but to recap, employers must ensure the health and safety committees develops written terms of reference that includes the required elements which we discussed earlier. Keep a record of committee members or representatives' names and contact information. Clearly post how to contact the committee or representatives at all applicable work sites, or share by other means, if the committee or representative agree. Keep committee special meeting minutes readily available for 2 years. In case either a committee member or Alberta OHS officer wants to see them. Ensure committee members or health and safety representatives are trained per legislated requirements. Please keep in mind there are other provisions in the OHS Act and Code that include employer requirements related to health and safety committees or representatives. These support the committees and representatives' core duties and their role. For example, of these employer responsibilities, see the Health and Safety Committees and Representatives Bulletin on the OHS Resource Portal. That brings us to the end of our content. If you have any questions about health and safety committees or health and safety representatives, call the OHS Contact Center at 1-866-415-8690. In Edmonton and surrounding area, call 780-415-8690. If you would like to help us improve our webinars, please fill out a short feedback survey. The link to the survey is on the YouTube page below the subscribe button. Thank you for viewing this webinar.